All right, let's get right into it. We're going to be looking at an investigation into a crime that absolutely shattered the peace of a small Australian town. It was a crime so brutal, it left an entire community and a family scarred forever. This is the story of the Kapunda murders. So I want you to picture the town of Kapunda in South Australia. We're talking a quiet, rural community, maybe 3,000 people. And this quote, it says it all. This isn't just about feeling safe. It's about a kind of unspoken trust that runs through a town like this, you know? The idea that your neighbors have your back, and that real danger, well, that's something that happens somewhere else, far away. People just didn't lock their doors, because why would you? The threat was unimaginable. But then came that Monday morning. A frantic call to the police just tore that feeling of safety to shreds. Someone walking by noticed something was terribly wrong at a house on Harriet Street. And inside, police found the bodies of Andrew and Rose Rowe and their 16-year-old daughter Chantel. In an instant, the unimaginable had become real. Okay, so let's start with the crime itself. Because to really understand the investigation that followed and the effect it had on this town, you have to get a sense of the sheer, raw brutality of what happened in that house. This wasn't just a murder. It was a complete explosion of violence. And it is so important to remember who was lost here. These were real people, the heart of a family. Andrew was known everywhere as a hardworking, super generous guy. Rose, she was the family handyman, always funny, just full of life. And Chantel, a joyful 16-year-old who, as one of her friends said, turned everything into a joke. Just a normal, wonderful family. Now this is really tough to process. The lead detective said it looked like something out of a horror movie, and there's a term for this kind of violence. It's called overkill. This wasn't a quick, detached act. The sheer number of wounds, inflicted with knives taken from their own kitchen, it just screams of a crime of intense, personal rage. And the evidence, it showed all three of them had fought back, desperately. With a crime this furious, you'd think the suspect would be obvious, right? An ex-lover, someone with a grudge. But the police had nothing. Absolutely nothing. And that just left the entire town of Kapunda terrified. The monster wasn't just among them. They were a ghost. No name, no face. The investigation felt like a complete search for a needle in a haystack. So the police response, it was immediate and it was massive. They had over 100 officers and volunteers scouring the town, knocking on 300 doors, looking for anything. But the house itself was a forensic nightmare. There was so much blood from the victims that trying to find the killer's DNA was incredibly difficult. But after all that painstaking work, they got it. An unknown male DNA profile, and critically, fingerprints on the back of Chantel's bedroom door. They finally had the ghost's signature. So, what is a DNA profile really? Well, on its own, it's not much. It's just a string of numbers. The best way to think about it is like having a key, but you have no idea what lock it opens. For it to be useful, you have to have something to compare it to, either a sample from a suspect or a match in a big database. And this was the huge blow. Investigators ran that killer's DNA through the entire national database, which has like 500,000 profiles in it. And the result? Nothing. Not a single match. Not one. Their single most powerful piece of evidence was a dead end. It felt like they were right back at square one. Okay, so with forensics hitting a brick wall, detectives had to completely change their strategy. They started looking much closer to home, digging into Chantel's social circle, talking to all her friends, her boyfriend. And that's when this one name kept popping up. A name that, tellingly, wasn't on the guest list for a party she'd just thrown. Jason Downey. And this is where it gets really chilling, because it shows you the two faces people can have. On the surface, 18-year-old Jason Downey was just this quiet, unremarkable apprentice mechanic. His own mom called him a happy-go-lucky boy. But underneath that quiet exterior was this deep, dark well of insecurity and obsession. He was constantly texting Chantel, not like a friend, but like someone who was just desperate for her attention. And Chantel, she was just trying to be kind, trying to gently manage him with no idea of the danger she was in. Okay, so this is the crucial moment. On the night of the murders, Chantel's boyfriend, Dylan, was just casually talking with Jason. And in this totally innocent conversation, he mentioned two things: that Chantel was homesick and that he, Dylan, wasn't going to be staying over. For anyone else, that's just information. But for Jason Downey, that was an opportunity. He now knew Chantal would be home, and he wrongly assumed she'd be alone. So when the police finally talked to Downey, they noticed these deep, raw-looking cuts on his hand right away. He tried to say he fell off his bike. They weren't buying it. So they asked him for a voluntary DNA sample and his fingerprints, and he agreed. Just 2 days later, the lab called. The DNA from the scene, the prints from Chantal's door, it was a perfect match. The ghost finally had a name. They had their man. But arresting your guy isn't always the end of the story. Securing a conviction, that's a whole other ballgame, and Downey's arrest was nowhere near the end. What came next was this confusing mess of legal games, outright lies, and this whole psychological battle to figure out not just what happened, but why. Yeah, this whole road to conviction was really winding. So first, Downey pleads guilty. Case closed, right? Nope. He starts writing these letters to his mom from jail, making up this fantasy where he's a hero who found the family already dead. This actually forced the prosecutors to do something super unusual. They made him plead guilty again just to make sure the conviction was totally ironclad. So finally, faced with all the evidence, Downey confesses for a second time. And when a psychologist sits him down and asks him, why? Why did you do it? The motive was just chillingly simple. His words? Pretty much jealousy. In his own mind, he'd built up this fantasy, believing he and Chantal had something on. And when he learned she was with her actual boyfriend, that delusion just shattered, and his twisted sense of entitlement exploded into a murderous rage. So where does this leave everybody? With the killer convicted, the story shifts. Now we have to look at the sentence, the incredible impact on the surviving family members, and the deep, permanent scars that were left on a town that really did lose its innocence forever. The sentence was life in prison. Jason Downey was given a non-parole period of 35 years. That's one of the longest sentences in South Australian history. It means he'll be in his mid-50s before he can even be considered for release. It's a number that represents a lifetime, but for the family, no number could ever be enough. But what does justice even mean when an entire family is just erased? The only surviving son, Christopher Rowe, stood up in court to read his victim impact statement, and he asked the court a question that no one could possibly answer. Please explain to me the justice in this. That question just hung there in the courtroom, showing how impossible it is to balance the scales of grief and punishment. And this leaves us with the most unsettling question of all, one that was actually brought up by a reporter who covered the case from day one. The whole community struggled with how a seemingly normal, quiet kid could do something so monstrous. He wasn't some villain from a movie, he was the boy next door. And that raises this terrifying thought that maybe the capacity for this kind of darkness isn't just in some far-off place. Maybe it could be dormant in anyone. And that is a thought that will stay with you long after the case is closed.